First contact fallout. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the Earth vessel Horizon, watching the Vizari diplomatic station grow larger against the backdrop of unfamiliar stars. The massive structure resembled a blooming flower, its crystalline petals catching and refracting starlight in mesmerizing patterns. Despite its beauty, she couldn't shake the feeling that this first contact situation was rapidly deteriorating. Their response was exactly as predicted, Dr. Marcus Reed said, joining her at the window. The xenoanthropologist's dark eyes reflected the station's shimmer. They think we're savages. Sarah's jaw tightened. The initial exchange with the Vizari Confederation had been enlightening, though not in the way humanity had hoped. Their first words weren't welcome or greeting, but rather shock that such primitive organisms had achieved space travel. Imagine, she said, traveling across half the galaxy to be lectured about our inefficient respiratory system. The memory of the Vizari representative's dismissive tone still rankled. They'd spent nearly an hour explaining how inferior human biology was compared to their own engineered perfection. The Horizon's bridge crew worked quietly behind them, preparing for docking. Each was handpicked not just for their skills, but for their ability to maintain composure in the face of the unknown. They'd need that composure today. The Vizari eliminated their need for sleep 2 centuries ago, Marcus continued. They've engineered their bodies to process energy directly from background radiation. They think our need for food and rest makes us evolutionarily inferior. Sarah turned from the window, her movement deliberate in the ship's artificial gravity. They've engineered away their challenges. We adapted to overcome ours. There's a difference. The docking procedure began, and Sarah felt the subtle shifts as the Horizon's systems synchronized with the station. The Vizari had seemed almost offended that humans still used crude gravitational systems rather than their own gravity-nullifying technology. Commander, Lieutenant Rivera's voice came from the communication station. The Vizari High Council is ready to receive us. There, she hesitated, requesting we wear environmental suits. They're concerned about potential contamination from our primitive biological processes. Sarah heard several crew members stifle reactions. She kept her own expression neutral, though her patience was wearing thin. Inform them we'll comply with their safety protocols. Squad 1, suit up. As her team prepared for departure, Sarah reflected on humanity's journey to this point. Earth had never been kind. Its high gravity, extreme weather, and diverse biosphere had forced humans to become incredibly adaptable. While the Vizari had used technology to transcend their biological limitations, humans had evolved to embrace theirs. The airlock cycled, and Sarah led her team into the station. The interior was as crystalline as the exterior, with corridors that seemed to be grown rather than built. Their guide, a tall, silvery being with flowing movements, waited for them. "Welcome, Earth delegation," the being said, its translated voice carrying unmistakable notes of condescension. "I am First Scholar Velix. Please follow me to the decontamination chamber." As they walked, Sarah noticed how the Vizari moved, flowing rather than stepping, their partially energy-based forms barely interacting with the physical environment. They were beautiful, certainly, but there was something almost insubstantial about them. The decontamination process was thorough, and Sarah suspected, unnecessarily long. Through it all, Velix lectured them about Vizari achievements in biotechnology and energy manipulation. Their civilization had split the atom before Earth's humans had discovered fire, apparently. "Your species still relies on chemical energy," Velix observed as they finally approached the council chambers. "How do you manage space travel with such limited energy processing capabilities?" "We manage," Sarah replied diplomatically, though she noticed Marcus hiding a smile. "Humans might need to eat and sleep, but they could also survive in environments that would destroy a Vizari's carefully engineered systems." The council chambers were a vast amphitheater, its walls lined with shifting patterns of light that Sarah realized were actually Vizari in their energy form. The High Council themselves sat in a semicircle, their forms more substantial but still seeming to float rather than truly occupy space. The Earth delegation, Velix announced, has been properly decontaminated and is ready for preliminary discussions regarding their petition to join the galactic community. Sarah stepped forward, her environmental suit's boots making solid contact with the floor, a sound that seemed to make several council members flinch. Honorable Council, we come seeking peaceful exchange and mutual understanding. Yes, one council member spoke, their form shimming with what Sarah interpreted as amusement. Your species' determination to reach the stars despite your biological limitations is admirable. However, we have concerns about accepting such a primitive species into the community. Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. She shared his frustration, but maintained her diplomatic composure. With respect, Counselor, what you call limitations, we call adaptations. Humanity has thrived not by transcending our nature, but by embracing it. A philosophical perspective, another council member observed, but hardly practical. Your species requires constant rest cycles, regular chemical energy intake, and cannot even survive exposure to vacuum without artificial protection. True, Sarah acknowledged. We also survived an ice age with stone tools, built civilizations in deserts and tundras alike, and reached space, despite having to overcome gravity 60% stronger than any other known homeworld. We don't consider our biology a limitation. It's the foundation of our strength. The council chambers grew quiet. Sarah could see the light patterns on the walls shifting more rapidly, suggesting increased communication among the Vizari. Finally, the central council member spoke. Your species intrigues us, Commander Chen. While we have reservations about your biological nature, your persistence merits further study. We will assign observers to your vessel to better understand how you function despite your constraints. It wasn't the warm welcome Earth had hoped for, but it was a start. As Sarah and her team left the council chambers, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Vizari's pride in their engineered perfection was a weakness they couldn't recognize. Humanity's primitive biology had taught them adaptation, innovation, and resilience, lessons the Vizari had never needed to learn. Looking back at the flowing, ethereal forms of their hosts, Sarah wondered if perhaps that would prove important someday. After all, humanity's greatest strength had always been thriving in conditions that should have been impossible to survive. The swarm approaches. 3 months into humanity's probationary observation period, the Horizon's crew had grown accustomed to their Vizari observers' constant disapproval. What they couldn't ignore were the increasing signs of tension among their hosts. Sarah noticed it in the way the station's light patterns had become erratic, in the hurried conferences that ended whenever humans approached. Something's wrong, she told Marcus as they reviewed sensor data in her office. The Vizari fleet movements have doubled in the past week. They're mobilizing for something. Marcus nodded, his dark fingers tracing patterns in the holographic display. The observers are asking strange questions lately. Not about our biology anymore. They want to know about human warfare, about how we handle catastrophic system failures. A chime interrupted them. Commander, Lieutenant Rivera's voice was tense. High Council requesting immediate conference. They're using the emergency protocols we've never seen them use before. Sarah was already moving. On my way. Alert Squad 1. Full tactical gear. She caught Marcus's questioning look. Call it a feeling. The council chambers had changed. Gone were the decorative light patterns. The Vizari council members' forms seemed more solid, their usual ethereal glow dampened. Fear, Sarah realized. She was seeing fear in a species that claimed to have engineered emotions away centuries ago. Commander Chen, the first speaker's voice carried none of its usual condescension. We face a situation that requires discussion. The central display activated, showing a star system Sarah didn't recognize. As she watched, something wrong appeared at the system's edge. Space itself seemed to twist, forming patterns that hurt her eyes. From this distortion emerged shapes, thousands of them, moving with horrible coordination. The Nexus Swarm, another council member spoke, a collective consciousness that consumes everything in its path. They adapt to any weapon used against them, incorporate any technology they encounter. We thought them contained in the Outer Rim, but they've evolved beyond our barriers. Sarah watched the recording as the swarm encountered a Vizari defense fleet. The Vizari ships were beautiful, perfect, advanced, and completely ineffective. Their energy weapons were absorbed, their shields penetrated, their gravity manipulation turned against them. The battle lasted less than an hour. How many systems lost? Sarah asked quietly. 3 in the past month. Our technology, our evolutionary advantages, mean nothing to them. They learn, adapt, consume. Our computational models give us less than 6 months before they reach the inner worlds. Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind racing. You've tried negotiation. A bitter laugh, so strange from a Vizari. They consume consciousness itself, Commander. There is no negotiating with a hunger that absolute. And now you want humanity's help. Marcus's voice carried an edge. The primitives with their inefficient biology. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Yes, the first speaker finally admitted. Your species. You think differently. You understand survival in ways we have forgotten. Our perfection has become our weakness. We can no longer conceive of solutions outside our engineered parameters. Sarah watched the recording loop again, seeing something in the swarm's movements. They adapt to everything you throw at them, because your responses are perfect, predictable. You've optimized yourself into a corner. She straightened. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our biology. It's our chaos. Explain, the first speaker demanded. You engineered away sleep. We learned to fight while exhausted. You transcended the need for chemical energy. We learned to function while starving. You eliminated pain. We learned to think clearly through it. Everything you see is a weakness. We've turned into a survival trait. She gestured to the display. The swarm adapts perfectly to perfect responses. But humanity, we're messy. We try stupid things that shouldn't work. We break patterns. We survive by being gloriously, catastrophically unpredictable. The council chambers erupted in debate, light patterns swirling as the Vizari communicated in ways humans couldn't perceive. Sarah waited, watching the swarm recording. Her mind was already racing with possibilities, strategies no Vizari would ever consider because they were too inefficient, too risky, too human. Finally, the first speaker raised a hand for silence. The council has deliberated. Humanity's provisional status is suspended. We formally request Earth's assistance in combating the Nexus swarm. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll need full access to your tactical data and direct communication with Earth Command. And one more thing. She met the first speaker's gaze. No more comments about primitive biology. Because those primitive traits you've been mocking, they're about to become our greatest weapons. As she left the chamber, Sarah was already composing her message to Earth Command. The Vizari had engineered themselves into perfect beings, but perfection was predictable. Against an enemy that adapted to perfection, humanity's glorious imperfections might be the galaxy's only hope. The Horizon's crew was waiting when she returned. Orders, Commander. Lieutenant Rivera asked. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Contact Earth. Tell them humanity's about to show the galaxy why evolution favored the adaptable over the perfect. The Nexus swarm was about to learn what every predator on Earth had learned over millions of years. Underestimate human improvisation at your own risk. The human factor. The Vizari war room had never seen anything like it, where their strategic planning usually involved precise holographic models and perfect probability calculations. Now the walls were covered with hand-drawn diagrams and what looked like random scribbles. In the center of the chaos stood Commander Sarah Chen, explaining concepts that made the Vizari observers' forms flicker with disbelief. You want to intentionally introduce errors into our defense systems. First Scholar Velix's voice carried equal parts horror and fascination. And you call this noise? Sarah nodded, continuing to sketch on the tactical display. The swarm adapts to patterns. Your systems are too perfect. They create predictable patterns even in their randomization. We need real chaos, the kind only biological imperfection can create. The Earth fleet had arrived 3 days ago. 30 ships that looked crude and primitive compared to the Vizari's crystalline vessels. But these ships carried something the Vizari had never considered: human unpredictability. Look at your battle recordings, Marcus said, pointing to footage of the swarm's latest victory. They don't just adapt to your weapons, they adapt to your thinking. They expect perfect, logical responses because that's what your engineering demands. So we do the opposite. Lieutenant Rivera entered the room, carrying what looked like ancient paper notebooks. The Vizari observers recoiled slightly at such primitive technology, but Sarah had insisted. Can't hack paper, she'd explained. Can't predict what isn't in the system. The simulation results are in, Rivera reported. The Vizari Defense Network rejected 82% of our proposed modifications, called them inefficient and illogical. Sarah smiled. Perfect. Those are exactly the ones we want to implement. A junior Vizari analyst, their form barely maintaining coherence in their agitation, spoke up. But our systems are optimized for maximum effectiveness. These changes would reduce our computational efficiency by 47%. Exactly. Sarah turned to the display, showing the swarm's attack patterns. Look here. Every time you optimize your response, they adapt faster. But here, she pointed to a smaller engagement where a Vizari ship had suffered system damage. When your responses became erratic due to damage, it took them longer to counter. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Vizari had spent millennia perfecting their technology, engineering away every inefficiency. The idea of intentionally introducing chaos into their systems was almost physically painful to them. There's more, Marcus added. We've analyzed their adaptation patterns. The swarm doesn't just copy technology. They try to improve it, make it more efficient. They're like you in that way, which means they share our weaknesses. The first speaker finished, entering the room silently. Our drive for perfection becomes a vulnerability when faced with intentional imperfection. Sarah nodded. Earth animals developed camouflage not by being perfect, but by being just confusing enough to break predator recognition patterns. We're going to do the same thing to the swarm, but with technology. The next hours were a crash course in human chaos theory. Sarah's team demonstrated how to introduce controlled randomness into Vizari systems, how to create defensive patterns that looked like mistakes but contained hidden strengths. The Vizari watched in growing amazement as their perfect systems were transformed into something messier but far more unpredictable. But how will we coordinate our forces with such variability? Velix asked, their form shifting with concern. Sarah's answer came in the form of a combat exercise. The Horizon's crew demonstrated human military coordination, not through perfect technological integration, but through training, intuition, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions. Humans train for system failures, she explained. We expect things to go wrong. Your ships shut down when their computer systems are compromised. Ours switch to manual control. Your crews freeze when patterns don't match predictions. Ours improvise. The exercise results spoke for themselves. Against simulated swarm attacks, modified Vizari ships using human-inspired chaos protocols lasted 3 times longer than their unmodified counterparts. This goes against everything we are, the first speaker observed, watching the results. We engineered our species to transcend such messiness. With respect, Sarah replied, that's exactly why you need us. The swarm expects perfection because that's what they've always encountered. We're going to show them what happens when they face an enemy that thrives on imperfection. As if to punctuate her point, long-range sensors detected new swarm activity. They were moving faster than predicted, adapting to the Visari's defensive patterns with frightening speed. How long? Sarah asked, studying the tactical display. At current speeds, they'll reach the Visari core worlds in 4 weeks, Rivera reported. Half the time we initially estimated. Sarah looked at the first speaker. We're out of time for debate. Either we implement these changes now, or we watch the swarm consume everything in its path. The first speaker's form rippled with complex emotions. Finally, they spoke. Proceed, Commander. Show us how humanity's chaos can save us from the perfect enemy we cannot defeat alone. Sarah turned to her team. You heard them. Let's show the galaxy why Earth's greatest predators learned to fear the prey that never acted quite the way they expected. The war room burst into activity. Humans and Visari working together, imperfection and perfection finding a balance that neither species had imagined possible. The swarm was coming, but they were about to encounter something they'd never faced before, the controlled chaos of human warfare. Operation Thunderstorm. Operation Thunderstorm began with silence. The combined human Visari fleet hung motionless in the void of space, their systems running at minimal power. To any observer, they might have appeared disabled or abandoned. This was exactly what Sarah Chen wanted. Status report. She commanded from the Horizon's bridge, her voice barely above a whisper despite knowing the swarm couldn't possibly hear her. All ships maintaining emission control. Lieutenant Rivera responded. Visari crews are struggling with the concept of playing dead, but they're holding position. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Visari's perfect engineering made it physically uncomfortable for them to run their ships at less than peak efficiency. But they were learning. Swarm Advance Fleet detecting exactly what we want them to. Marcus added from his station, monitoring the enemy's approach. They're seeing our energy signatures as random background radiation, just like Earth predators missing camouflaged prey. The plan was uniquely human in its approach. Instead of trying to outfight the swarm's superior adaptation capabilities, they would exploit their expectations. The Visari had spent weeks modifying their ships following human guidelines, introducing controlled flaws, creating systems that appeared vulnerable but contained hidden strengths. Contact in 30 minutes, Rivera announced. Swarm maintaining current course. They're taking the bait. Sarah watched the tactical display, remembering similar hunting strategies from Earth's oceans. Like anglerfish using light to lure prey, they were drawing the swarm in with the promise of easy targets. Signal the fleet, she ordered. Final confirmation on emergency protocols. When everything goes wrong, that's when we strike. The next 20 minutes passed in tense silence. The swarm ships, black against the stars, grew larger on their screens. Their formation was perfect, optimized, predictable. They had never needed to be anything else. They're entering the primary engagement zone, Marcus reported. Reading standard adaptation protocols. They're scanning our damaged ships. Sarah leaned forward. Now we show them why humans learn to fight dirty. Execute Phase 1. Across the fleet, carefully crafted system failures began to cascade. Ships vented plasma in seemingly random patterns. Emergency beacons activated and deactivated in chaotic sequences. To the swarm's sensors, it must have looked like a feast of vulnerable technology. They're moving to engage, Rivera confirmed. Adaptation patterns focusing on our apparent vulnerabilities. Wait for it, Sarah murmured. The swarm ships were spreading out, each targeting what they perceived as easy prey. Wait. The first swarm vessel latched onto a Visari cruiser, extending its consumption tendrils. Sarah watched as its sensors detected the ship's apparently failing systems, its seemingly compromised defenses. Now, the trap sprung with devastating effect. Every failing system suddenly surged with power, not in the perfect, synchronized way the swarm expected, but in chaotic, unpredictable bursts. Ships that appeared dead erupted with weapons fire from hidden ports. Defense systems activated in random sequences that made no logical sense but created overlapping fields of destruction. Multiple swarm ships showing signs of confusion. Marcus reported, excitement creeping into his voice. Their adaptation protocols are trying to compensate, but they can't find a pattern to lock onto. Sarah keyed the fleet-wide channel. Execute Phase 2. Show them what controlled chaos looks like. The human ships moved first, demonstrating maneuvers that the Visari had initially declared inefficient and illogical. They spiraled through their own weapons fire, used irregular acceleration patterns that no computer would recommend, and deliberately presented apparent weaknesses that became deadly traps. The Visari ships followed, their crews finally understanding the power of controlled imperfection. Ships that the swarm thought they had consumed suddenly transformed their consumption connections into conduits for devastating counterattacks. Swarm adaptation rate dropping, Rivera announced. Their predictive algorithms are failing. They don't know what we're going to do because we don't know what we're going to do. Sarah watched as the perfect formation of the swarm began to break apart. Their attempts to adapt to each new threat were met with completely different challenges. Every time they optimized their response to one attack pattern, they became vulnerable to 3 others. Commander, Marcus called out, I'm detecting signs of actual confusion in their collective consciousness. They're trying to optimize their responses, but our chaos is forcing them to maintain too many adaptation patterns simultaneously. The battle that followed would be studied for generations. Human unpredictability combined with Visari technology created something entirely new. A fighting force that couldn't be adapted to because it never did the same thing twice. Ships performed maneuvers that violated tactical doctrine, but succeeded precisely because they made no sense. When it was over, the swarm advance fleet was in ruins. The few survivors retreated, their perfect adaptation protocols shattered by encounters with intentional imperfection. Sarah stood on the horizon's bridge, watching the aftermath of their victory. Beside her, First Speaker's form glowed with an emotion that might have been humility. We had forgotten, they said softly, that evolution favors adaptation over perfection. Your species never forgot that lesson. Survival isn't about being perfect, Sarah replied. It's about being impossible to predict. She turned to the tactical display, where the main body of the swarm still waited at the edge of known space, and were just getting started. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Still, something fundamental had changed. The Visari had learned to embrace chaos, and the swarm had learned to fear it. As Sarah prepared to brief Earth Command on their victory, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization was teaching it the value of imperfection. Evolution's gift. The Visari High Council chamber had changed. Where once crystalline perfection dominated every surface, now intentional asymmetries caught the eye. Imperfect patterns created shadows that danced across walls that were no longer uniformly smooth. Even the Visari themselves had begun experimenting with less rigid forms, their energy signatures flickering with newfound unpredictability. Sarah Chen stood before the council, her uniform bearing the scars of 3 months of constant warfare. Behind her, tactical displays showed the current state of the conflict, a chaos of battle lines and defensive positions that would have been unthinkable to the Visari just months ago. The swarm is adapting, she reported, but not in the way they're used to. They're trying to become more unpredictable themselves, but it's like watching a computer try to generate true randomness. The patterns are still there, and this gives us advantage. First Speaker asked, their form now permanently shifted to a less perfect but more dynamic configuration. They're fighting against billions of years of evolutionary programming. Marcus explained from his position beside Sarah. The swarm, like the Visari, evolved toward perfection. They optimize automatically. But now, that's becoming their weakness. The tactical display shifted to show their latest victory. The combined human Visari fleet had developed what they called structured chaos protocols. Battle strategies that appeared random but contained hidden patterns that only worked because they made no logical sense. The swarm's latest adaptation attempts have actually made them more vulnerable. Sarah continued, "They're trying so hard to be unpredictable that they're becoming predictable in their unpredictability. Meanwhile, our forces are embracing true chaos." The display showed Visari ships performing maneuvers that would have been considered insane 3 months ago. They deliberately induced systems failures to create unexpected advantages. They used damaged components as weapons. They fought like humans, messy, creative, and absolutely impossible to fully predict. "We've pushed them back from 27 systems," Sarah reported. "But now we're detecting something new. The swarm is changing at a fundamental level." The central display showed recent sensor data. The swarm's usual perfect geometric patterns were breaking down. Individual units were showing signs of independence, trying to break free from the collective consciousness that had always been their strength. "They're experiencing an evolutionary crisis," Marcus explained. "Their drive for perfection is fighting with their need to adapt to our chaos. The resulting cognitive dissonance is tearing their collective consciousness apart." A murmur ran through the council chamber. The Visari had seen something similar in their own society, the rigid pursuit of perfection giving way to an appreciation for adaptability. But for the swarm, this crisis was happening at a devastating speed. "We've detected increasing incidents of swarm units acting independently," Sarah continued. "Some are even turning against the collective. They're literally evolving in response to our tactics, but the evolution is destroying their unity." First speaker rose, their form pulsing with complex emotions. "You have not just taught us to fight differently, Commander. You have taught us, and our enemy, the price of pursuing perfection at the cost of adaptability." The tactical display updated again, showing the latest intelligence. The swarm was fracturing. What had once been a perfect, unified force was now splitting into competing factions. Some tried to maintain their drive for perfection, while others attempted to embrace chaos. None could match the natural unpredictability of human tactics. "We estimate total swarm collapse within 2 weeks," Sarah concluded. "Their remaining forces are too divided to maintain effective combat operations. What we're seeing now is essentially an evolutionary civil war." The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Finally, first speaker addressed the assembly. "When humans first arrived, we saw them as primitive. Their need for sleep, their dependence on chemical energy, their emotional responses, all seemed like weaknesses. We were wrong." They gestured to the tactical display. "These primitive traits gave humanity something we had engineered away: the ability to embrace chaos, to find strength in imperfection. Their biology forced them to become adaptable in ways we had forgotten were possible." Sarah watched as the Visari council members shifted their forms, each adopting slightly different configurations. Even this small embrace of imperfection would have been unthinkable months ago. "The swarm consumed countless civilizations," first speaker continued, "each more technologically advanced than the last. But they had never encountered a species that turned imperfection into an advantage. They had never faced humans. The final battle plans were already being drawn up, not with perfect tactical computers, but with human intuition supported by Visari technology. The remaining swarm forces would face an enemy that had mastered the art of controlled chaos." Commander Chen, first speaker, addressed Sarah directly. "Humanity's provisional status in the galactic community is hereby permanently suspended. Instead, we offer you full membership and a proposal. We want humans to teach us how to be imperfect." Sarah smiled. "That first speaker might be the most perfect suggestion I've heard yet." As she left the council chamber, Sarah reflected on how far both species had come. The Visari had learned that perfection could be a weakness, while humanity had proven that their evolutionary flaws were actually sophisticated survival adaptations. The swarm had invaded looking for perfectible technology to consume. Instead, they had encountered something their perfect adaptation protocols couldn't handle: the glorious chaos of human warfare. In trying to adapt to humanity's structured randomness, they had begun to evolve away from their own perfection, and that evolution was tearing them apart. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't their technology or their military strength. It was teaching the galaxy that true evolutionary success came not from achieving perfection, but from maintaining the ability to adapt, to change, and sometimes to just make it up as you go along. The war wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The perfect enemy was falling to imperfect humanity, and the galaxy would never be the same.